They thought they were clever when they started that little game with you. A smirk here, a whispered insult there, a calculated push to see how far they could stretch your patience before something snapped. They mistook your calm for uncertainty and your silence for fear. People like that always do. They attack what they don't understand and underestimate what they can't measure. They didn't realize you weren't playing to win their approval. You were simply watching them build a trap around themselves, brick by sloppy brick, while pretending they had you cornered. The joke, the delicious joke, is that you never stepped into their arena at all. You just let them think you did long enough for the ending to write itself. Another thing they didn't consider was how much power grows in someone who learns to sit with silence instead of reacting to provocation. You didn't run to defend yourself. You didn't explain, justify, or shrink. You observed. You cataloged their moves like an amused spectator watching amateurs pretend they're strategists. Every petty jab they threw revealed more about their insecurity than about your character. And what terrified them most was your refusal to give them the emotional fuel they needed. They wanted your rage. They got your indifference. They wanted chaos. They got calculation. And that mismatch alone was enough to derail their little performance. Somewhere along the line, they began noticing the shift. Their jokes weren't landing. Their accusations weren't spreading. Their influence was slipping through their fingers faster than they could tighten their grip. People around them started noticing the cracks, the desperation, the trembling edges of a plan falling apart. They felt it too. That strange pressure in the room every time you walked in. A presence they couldn't predict anymore. A silence that didn't shrink but expanded. They didn't understand how someone they tried to minimize began taking up so much invisible space. That misunderstanding became the seed of their downfall. The unraveling wasn't theatrical. It was slow and humiliating, like fabric tearing thread by thread until they were standing exposed with nothing left to hide behind. They scrambled for new tactics, desperate ones, messy ones, hoping that something would pull you back into the old dynamic where they felt superior, but you'd already stepped out of reach. Their attempts only made their desperation louder. They began contradicting themselves, spilling secrets, sabotaging each other, attacking shadows when the only enemy they ever had was the one inside their own chest. Watching them collapse under the weight of their own strategy must have felt surreal, like witnessing a puppet cut its own strings while insisting it's still in control. Then came the rise, yours, quiet, deliberate, unstoppable. You changed your posture, your standards, your focus, not out of revenge, but out of evolution. You no longer responded to small minds with large reactions. You no longer opened doors for people who had already shown you they preferred crawling through cracks. You built boundaries so thick they could hear the echo of their own irrelevance when they tried to cross them. And the more you grew, the more they shrank. That's the thing about power. Real power. It doesn't roar, it radiates. It makes everyone who once felt bold in your absence suddenly afraid in your presence. Your transformation unnerved them more than any confrontation ever could. They didn't know what to do with someone who no longer broke under pressure. Their game relied on controlling the narrative, shaping your reactions, stirring your emotions. But you became unreadable, a moving target they couldn't track, a rhythm they couldn't mimic, a threat they couldn't even name. They tried to pretend they weren't bothered, but every failed attempt to regain control stained them with a kind of panic they couldn't mask. They realized too late that their game only worked on someone who still cared. You didn't? The beauty of your rise was that it didn't require punishment. It required clarity. And clarity is something destructive people never expect you to develop. You saw through their smiles, their manipulation, their patterns, their intentions. You stopped defending yourself because there was nothing left to defend. You stopped proving yourself because the truth no longer needed your voice. They tried to provoke you one last time, thinking you'd slip, thinking you'd fall. Instead, you stepped out of their reach entirely, and that move, that single moment of clean detachment, shattered whatever fantasy of control they still believed they had. And this is where the ending began writing itself. Not because you forced it, but because their own behavior demanded it. When you stopped contributing to the chaos, they had no fuel left to burn. When you stopped reacting, their tactics became visible. When you stopped participating, their identity lost purpose. They started the game expecting to break you. Instead, the game exposed them. They spiraled into paranoia, into projection, into frantic attempts to reclaim relevance. But the battlefield had already shifted, and they were standing alone in a war they manufactured for someone who no longer recognized it as a threat. The devastating ending wasn't a strike you delivered. It was a truth they finally had to face. They played a game built on cruelty, assumption, and ego. You answered with growth, silence, and elevation. And elevation always destroys the ones who depend on control. They never imagined the finale would come from your refusal to play. They never imagined you'd outgrow the battlefield they trapped you in. They never imagined the ending would be quiet, clean, and absolute. But that's exactly what made it devastating. You didn't beat them. You became someone they could never reach. They still don't understand how quickly the shift happened. They keep replaying old conversations, scanning old messages, inspecting memories the way a detective examines clues, hoping to spot the precise moment you slipped out of their hands. They reread the first page again and again because they believed the story was frozen there. They believed the version of you they knew would stay predictable, manageable, easily manipulated. They never expected you to evolve mid-sentence. They never imagined you'd turn the page before they even realized there was a next page. While they clung to familiar tactics, you outgrew the entire dynamic, leaving them stranded in a moment that no longer held any meaning for you. That's the horror for them. Discovering that time moved differently for you, that you kept writing while they kept clinging. Some nights they still convince themselves you'll return to that first chapter. They imagine you revisiting old wounds, reopening old arguments, stepping back into the story they tried so desperately to control. Yet every attempt they make to drag you backward only exposes how trapped they are in the narrative they created. They don't want resolution, they want repetition. Same patterns, same emotions, same roles, same power imbalance. But you outgrew those rehearsed roles the moment you realized they were choking your potential. Your growth didn't wait for their permission. It didn't consult their comfort. It didn't require their understanding. You walked forward, and they stayed behind, clutching the beginning like it was a lifeline instead of a limitation. What unsettles them now is the ease with which you detached. They spent so much time believing they were central to your story that your departure feels like a violation of their imagined importance. They can't grasp how someone who once tolerated their disrespect now moves with a confidence that makes their presence unnecessary. They reread the first page because it contains their illusion of control, a memory of a time when they could disrupt your peace with a single word. But when you closed that chapter, you closed their access. Their influence evaporated, and the story continued without them. The realization that they no longer occupy any meaningful space in your world gnaws at them like a slow, burning acid. Their confusion grows each time they attempt to pull you back and find no reaction waiting. They craft messages, scenarios, provocations, all designed to lure you into old cycles. Yet every effort falls flat because you're no longer there. You're somewhere they cannot reach, operating with a clarity they've never possessed. You're reading from a later chapter, one filled with self-respect, boundaries, and purpose. When they address you as the old version of yourself, they sound foolish, like someone speaking to a ghost that has long since moved on. They keep reciting the script from chapter 1, blind to the fact that the story's tone, energy, and protagonist have all changed. There's a cruel twist in watching them cling to that first page. It exposes everything they tried to hide, the insecurity behind their arrogance, the desperation behind their control, the fear behind their bravado. They reread the beginning because they felt powerful there. They felt superior. They felt like they had you figured out. In their mind, that page was safety. That page was certainty. But chapters evolve, characters grow, and endings rewrite everything that came before. You walked into a chapter that demands strength, intention, and discipline, while they remained in a chapter that only required manipulation. They never imagined the separation would be this sharp. The story now plays differently for you. You're not reacting, you're leading. You're not searching for answers in old wounds. You're building new paths with new rules. That shift terrifies people who depend on your past to define you. They want you frozen in the version of yourself they felt comfortable controlling. But the truth is simple. Growth makes old rooms too small, old patterns too predictable, and old relationships too heavy. Closing the chapter wasn't an escape. It was an evolution. And evolution always outpaces ego-driven games. Their downfall intensifies when they finally admit the chapter won't reopen. They realize your silence is not a pause, but a conclusion. They realize your distance is not avoidance, but elevation. They realize your change wasn't triggered by them. It was inspired by who you wanted to become. And nothing pierces the ego of a manipulator more than discovering they were never the architect of your transformation. They thought they were the villain in your story, shaping your downfall. Instead, they were the lesson that shaped your rise. Some try to rewrite the narrative after losing control. They tell others you abandoned them, betrayed them, misunderstood them. They claim you changed too fast, too drastically, too coldly. But their retelling collapses under its own weight because the evidence sits in the wreckage they left behind. Every broken trust, every manipulative moment, every cheap tactic, all of it points to why the chapter had to close. People see through the cracks, and the more they try to revise the beginning, the more obvious it becomes that they're still stuck in it, incapable of moving forward. You, meanwhile, continue writing a story with no desire to revisit the prologue. New strength emerges with every step. New clarity replaces old confusion. New standards replace old tolerances. You don't need applause for your growth. The results speak for themselves. They kept rereading the first page because they were terrified of what came next. You closed the chapter because you were finally ready for what came next. That difference, that psychological divide, is the ending they never prepared for.